Moments from now, the White House Coronavirus Task Force will be coming out for another briefing, and we'll take you there once it happens. But first, to today's other big news. Barack Obama finally endorses Joe Biden. For months, the former president sat on the sidelines and stayed silent, watching his VP get pummeled in an absolutely brutal primary season. But now that Biden has emerged victorious, things have changed in a major way.
Honesty and humility, empathy and grace. That kind of leadership doesn't just belong in our state capitals and mayor's offices. It belongs in the White House. And that's why I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States. Choosing Joe to be my vice president was one of the best decisions I ever made, and he became a close friend. And I believe Joe has all the qualities we need in a president right now.
So why did it take so long? Remember, it's been well documented that Biden wasn't Obama's first choice. Obama reportedly tried to get Biden not to run for president. The former president was worried that his former VP would, quote, embarrass himself. Meanwhile, Joe Biden desperately needs the support of Bernie Sanders' far-left supporters. Sanders' own campaign spokeswoman openly attacked Biden and refused to endorse. So listen to Obama's pitch to those disaffected Bernie supporters.
If I were running today, I wouldn't run the same race or have the same platform as I did in 2008. The world is different. There's too much unfinished business for us to just look backwards. We have to look to the future. Bernie understands that, and Joe understands that. It's one of the reasons that Joe already has what is the most progressive platform of any major party nominee in history.
All right, Judge Jeanine, first of all, the thing that struck me was how gray the former president is going on up top. But I guess that's what happens. What did you think about the endorsement? I know you can't do it in front of a 30,000 crowd, at a swing state. It's a pitch on the internet. What did you think?
Well, I think it's disingenuous at best. I think that a lot of what he said doesn't really hold any water. What does hold water is, yeah, he's probably more progressive, but most of the progressives, including the Sanders people, are going to disagree because they want Medicare for all, they want their student debt eliminated, and they want a wealth tax, and Joe Biden isn't in favor of any of that. But, I can't help but think, and maybe, it's just the skeptic in me, I say to myself, who is Joe Biden? Why does Obama want to get involved in this? Think about it, Jesse. When was the last time you remember a president, an ex-president, actively campaigning against a sitting president? This is contrary to anything that we've seen in this country before. But Barack Obama hates Donald Trump so much that he's going to continue to go after him. And it doesn't matter to him whether it's an empty suit like Joe Biden or, a guy who doesn't know where he is or what he's thinking. Maybe they've got people around him who are going to control Joe, and maybe that's to Obama's benefit. But make no mistake, the fact that we're just hearing from Obama doesn't mean that he just showed up. He's been in the background the whole time, pulling strings.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. And I'm wondering, to your point about former presidents, Dana, getting out there 4 years later and campaigning against incumbents, did Bill Clinton get out there in 2004 and go after Bush? From what I remember, he laid pretty low.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, and I don't think that he did. And also, I think in 2012, I was just trying to think about that as the judge was saying that. I don't believe that 43 did anything beyond congressional and Senate races during the 2012 race. So, yes, I think that probably holds true. But I've been telling you from the beginning, Jesse, when everybody was goading Obama, why aren't you doing it? And I said he will not do it until it is secured that whoever the nominee is going to be, it will be. And I think that it's a little bit like a sugar high. Because now that he's done it and we're in the middle of a pandemic, it's like I don't think it's going to have a lot of long-term energy. He didn't include a fundraising link in the video, which I think probably the Biden team really needs. And usually I would be quite dismissive of what former campaign aides said about something. But the Bernie Sanders campaign people, they actually have quite a large social media following, and they're not buying it. Just because Bernie caved, they're not going to cave. There's a lot still to be decided, and who knows, in the middle of a pandemic, how President Obama could be effective. I do think he's been effective, and I think when the history books are written, when Biden won in South Carolina, we'll find out that Barack Obama had a little bit of something to help nudge that endorsement in the right direction from Congressman Clyburn.
I think you're probably right about that. Juan, can you translate what Obama meant when he was making the pitch to the Bernie bros? What did that really mean? What was he selling there?
Well, I think he's saying, in fact, you have a more progressive candidate in Joe Biden than he was, than Obama was when he ran in 08 and 12, and even when he left office. There are a lot of people on the left who wanted the president to be even more aggressive with regard to health care coverage in this country, things like how do we pay for college. But the larger point is here, again, speaking to what Judge Jeanine mentioned, remember that Bill Clinton had a little problem there that wasn't exactly helpful to Al Gore, and President Bush had the war, which wasn't popular, and that wasn't going to be helpful to John McCain. That's a different context. Right now, you've got a candidate, Joe Biden, who has defied all the doubters and all the people who called him names, and he's beat all comers in the Democratic Party, and now he has the former president, the most popular Democrat in the country, the former president, as I said, riding shotgun. And you couldn't have someone better because you know what? Joe Biden knows Barack Obama. Barack Obama knows Joe Biden. He can speak to his character about, the empathy and kindness that we see in the middle of this pandemic from so many Americans now going to the White House, as he said, but also to the fact that, gee, this is a guy that helped us with the recovery. This is a guy who helped us when it came to dealing with Ebola. This is the guy who knows what he's doing. He's knowledgeable. He's experienced. He's ready for the job. And with regard to this business about Sanders and who, I think it was Sanders' PR person or press secretary who said, I'm not endorsing Joe Biden. I can't even tell you the woman's name. But again, it's a unified Democratic Party at this point against Donald Trump. This is why Donald Trump was going to the Ukrainians. He didn't want to face this.
Well, I would disagree about a strong economic recovery under Barack Obama and Joe Biden. I'd also disagree about a unified party. Greg, what do you think about it all?
Well, I heard that, when Joe was told that he got Obama's endorsement, he said, well, did he also write for deposit only? Don't you find it? Nobody liked that joke. I don't even think I liked it. I find it awesomely ironic. I find it awesomely ironic that Joe Biden is running for president in the era of social distancing. I mean, isn't that the cruelest punishment you could put on him? That he can't touch anybody through this entire period. Look, you know what Obama is like? Remember when your teacher would march you over to another student and goad you to apologize, or your parents force you to invite the kid you don't like to your birthday party because his mother and your mother play bridge? That's Obama endorsing Biden. His heart's not into it at all. We know that, but he felt he had to do it. Because Joe, I don't believe Joe was there for everything. Joe does not strike me as somebody you go to ask for professional advice. He's the guy at work who's dressed really well, has a nice watch. He's always at every holiday party when there's free pizza. But no one really knows what he does. And he loves to wear the bomber jacket and the aviator sunglasses. He loves the expense account. He loves being that guy, but he's not the guy that really knows what was going on, and he never really wanted to.
Can
Judge.
I say one more thing before we go to break, Jesse? The thing that infuriates me is the allegations by what is it, Tara Reid, is that her name? The woman who claimed that she was sexually assaulted. And the New York Times coming out and saying, we've got no other complaints. There's no pattern of sexual misconduct. The guy's sniffing every woman he ever met, going up and down her back, her hair, her neck. And, you know, they're saying this guy's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, Greg, you're absolutely right. Social distancing is going to be the biggest punishment the guy could ever have. And I'm discussing with the Times, and, you know, Me Too ought to get their act together. It applies to the Democrats, too.
Yeah. Biden running in the age of social distancing is like Trump running before social media. It's not going to work. All right.